Right, we're back live with you tonight on In Focus. A study by the U.S. Agency for International Development and local research partners suggests that South Africa is a haven for human trafficking. The study reveals that almost 11,000 cases have been reported to police over the last 7 years. Researchers say the prosecution, however, on human trafficking cases does not reflect the scope of the crime in the country. Madri Bruwer, a counsellor at Straatwerk, joins us now for more on this particular trend and phenomenon. Madri, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. From just those numbers as revealed, and we will not dwell much on the numbers, but let's talk about the experience, that there is generally a sense that there is a poor performance, and I'm not sure whether is it from the prosecuting authorities or is it from the entire criminal justice system in as far as what is being reported as human trafficking cases and what is being prosecuted in South Africa right now. Is that, in a sense, the experience that victims are relating to you and that you certainly feel is what is prevalent on the ground?
I think the prevalence that we see on ground level is that definitely, even in the bigger numbers that's being portrayed and those reports that are being made, that there's so many more ladies that's involved in commercial sexual exploitation and then specifically also in human trafficking. I think the concern is that so many doesn't report or doesn't get reported, and then obviously the nature of the crime is of such a extremity that it's very difficult to address it. So we are very thankful for each time that it does happen, that there's a prosecution or that somebody actually takes the courage to report it. And I think there's appreciation for what's being done, but there's also a very strong urge in the hearts of many people who is involved in this field of care to say, is there a way that somehow there can be more reports invited and then also being followed up on the reports that are received. So it's both a thank you and encouragement to somehow work on that to get it, to get more prosecutions.
Give us one or two things that in your view are a bottleneck to getting the cases in the system. So, I mean, for example, if you're saying some cases are hardly reported, what's the reason? What are the driving factors there? And those that are reported, how difficult is it to get them into the system?
Yeah, I think the one thing that one of the phenomena that stops women from reporting is fear. It's because the whole industry of commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking is built on control. So the whole Stockholm syndrome and the fear that, it's not going to help me to report. And then I would say on the other side, and that's a little bit more difficult to comment on, but when the reports are being made to get the information, and there's also a fear element to make sure that those who's reporting gives information that can be followed up. And I really want to encourage everybody who's interested in this to contact 821 and other like-minded organizations who's fully informed and can help with information that really can lead to further investigations and follow up on that and can help with very clear strategies to follow in that procedures.
Yeah. In what way would you say is the legal system dropping the ball in the sense of having 11,000 cases but hardly seeing any prosecution on human trafficking? I mean, less than 80 is what this report is suggesting.
Yeah, that is concerning statistics. I find it hard to nail down one specific thing. As I say, I think also to look at the environment in which it's done. It's very difficult to get that information. But I think what we're asking for is also just that there will be follow-up and that it will be followed through till there's a clear outcome on it. I think sometimes the prevalence of the cases coming in, even though it's not as many as it can be, can be very challenging because of the extremity of it and the different syndicates and stuff involved in it. So I think there's the lack in enough information sometimes, but even when it's there, that it will be followed up further.
Yeah. Just tease those intricacies for me a little bit more. How complex are human trafficking cases to prosecute successfully?
I'm not an expert in the prosecution part, but I would say from the nature of the crime itself, it so easily goes underground, and it so easily has information that's difficult to find. And I do want to link the whole prostitution legislation issue that's on the table at this stage. There's this call for full decriminalization. And many of us are saying, please don't do that, because it's already so difficult to find that information. And if there's a context in which commercial sexual exploitation just happens, and it's ironic, but it will further just cover up the things that's happening underground, which is then the human trafficking you're asking about.
Yeah. Who are these individuals who are wanting to take advantage of this particular situation in South Africa? Basically, simple question, who is exploiting women in South Africa? Because this particular report says we are also seemingly a source, right? We are also a transit point, but over and above that, we are also a destination. So who is sourcing from South Africa?
Yeah, I think when I again just looked at the article you're referring to, I was thinking, do we realize it's our women and children? And then those who's transiting through, that's somebody else's women and children, but they're also ours when they're here, and then also a destination. So I think there's just a lot of financial push, because the old saying that you can sell a gun once or you can sell drugs once, but the person you can keep selling. So just that whole crave for money and for power, and there's so much of that in this industry of control and power. And I think there's just, from the perspective of realizing that God made us with a purpose, and that we need to find that instead of pursuing things that doesn't satisfy. And I think that's what we see in the commercial sexual exploitation, the whole field of that people are trying to find a way to fill their hearts and fill their, their souls, but they don't find it. So we just keep on pushing. And I think in this whole industry, that is so evident that, building on people's desire, and then it fails everybody. The money fails, the false intimacy fails, and I think it raised this question, what are people really looking for, and helping each other to find that rather than to fall into this pit of, just meaninglessness.
As a counsellor, how do you close that loop for, I suppose, those who would have been victims and somewhat they could have been spared, but are thinking of going back again? In some instances, they do get back into that cycle.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're asking how does one journey with somebody coming out of that place?
Indeed, yeah.
So I would say each time that we have the privilege of journeying with a woman like that, we have the opportunity and the huge privilege of journeying with her as she's learning. So you would know that at the root of abuse often is, we're saying there's two sides of it. It's the abuse and it's the two sides of trauma. And if you look at human trafficking, sometimes there's a place where somebody had no choice, but there's also a place where it seems like, well, they had a choice. Why would they even make that choice? But it's with the limited options they have and out of the brokenness in their hearts and in their lives. So to find a firm foundation, and we do believe that that's actually possible, that God can restore us to that place of actually being in a relationship with Him and with other people, and then to say, well, what is needed is restoration, so to get back to a place of functioning, but even more than that, transformation. So if you can think of a butterfly which was a worm at first, and then to know that there's a God-ordained destiny for each person, and then for them to find who they really are, that's part of it. But there's also this huge element of coming alongside in the trauma and working through that hurt and working through that brokenness. Often when somebody makes a choice, it's out of that place of saying, well, I've been abused and neglected so much before, now I'm just going to get money for it, and then perhaps I won't be neglected that much anymore. So I want to say, back to your previous question, that even those who are the perpetrators, who are using and abusing, or even the human trafficking leaders, that they're also coming out of brokenness. So you have a system that's feeding off brokenness. And that message is that there's actually healing for everybody, but it's a process, and there's humans needed. We need to be connected to each other, and counseling is just a small part of that.
Yeah.
A significant one, but a small part.
We touched on the question that we also are becoming a transit point, so to speak, to destinations in other countries, which I suppose also speak to what we need to do as far as our border controls are concerned. Yes.
Yes, there's a huge question about that, and obviously with our porous borders and a lot of things that's happening. And I mean, we have to also, just for the sake of those who are trying to do their best in that, obviously there's lots of techniques that's used that do exploit that. But definitely we need to look into that, and we are so thankful for the people working on the airports and other places actually coming alongside identifying traffic victims and actually stopping trafficking happening. So on the one hand, we're saying, there's too much of it happening. On the other hand, we want to say well done to so many organizations who are actually standing against that, and just for our good border control where it is available.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Madri, for coming on. Madri Bruwer, counsellor at Straatwerk.